The Bluebird is hopefully part of our past, our present, and if we do our job, our future.
It's Tuesday, May 21st, and this is an interview edition of Your Daily Detroit. I'm Sven Gustafson.
And I'm Jer Stays.
You just heard from Carleton Gholz of the Detroit Sound Conservancy, a nonprofit focused on preserving Detroit's rich musical legacy. He was talking about the Bluebird Inn. That's the legendary former jazz club the nonprofit recently purchased, with plans to renovate and reopen it as a jazz club and headquarters. Gholz recently stopped by the Podcast Detroit studio at the Detroit Shipping Company to tell us all about that project and the history of the Bluebird Inn. That's coming right up, right after this. Daily Detroit and episodes like this one are made possible in part by the support of our Patreon members. If you enjoy what you're hearing from us, consider becoming a member. For as little as $1 a month or as much as you want, you can help ensure that we keep pushing Detroit's conversation forward by pushing out great podcast episodes like this one. And you'll get free stickers in return. Visit dailydetroit.com/join. Joining us in studio is Carleton Gholz. He's director and founder of the Detroit Sound Conservancy. Carleton, welcome to Daily Detroit.
Thanks for having me.
The Bluebird Inn, a name from Detroit's past and, not so distant past in some ways, but I think a lot of people are not familiar with this. Tell us, set the table a little bit. What is the Bluebird Inn?
Thanks for having me. And the Bluebird is hopefully part of our past, our present, and if we do our job, our future. Just to be clear, I'm an activist in music preservation. There are so many people who really know that jazz world so deep. There are new books coming out, and of course the classic book is that Lars Bjorn, Jim Gallert book. If people haven't read the Before Motown book, it's just excellent about that moment before Motown, where we had just dozens and dozens of spots, right? A whole ecosystem of music.
Jazz was the big music scene in Detroit, correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had so much different types of stuff because so many different types of people here. But jazz was, it wasn't taught in schools. It hadn't gotten to the, in our lifetime, I'm in my 40s now. We were actually taught jazz as sort of curriculum, but these are the people who built it as the curriculum.
Yeah.
But jazz was the hot, young, youthful, sophisticated at times music, and Detroiters were purveyors of it and were part of the larger communities, and we had spots, and the Bluebird was one of those spots, and it had music before that. It actually goes back to the 1930s, late 30s on the Detroit's west side. So. Grand River and Tireman. So
5021 Tireman.
5021. Yeah. It was a local neighborhood spot. It's very much how we did music culture here in Detroit for many, many years. It wasn't all Cobo Hall and big downtown stuff. It was also very local. And it went through a lot of rough patches to the point where it was, blighted. And
it closed in the early 2000s, right?
Yeah, roughly. Roughly. Yep. And it went through a bunch of different owners and went on foreclosure.
So was it still hosting gigs in that day? I don't personally remember that name too much. I mean, and I know, I've been to Baker's many times and stuff, but I was never hip to the Bluebird.
The family that was sort of the golden era family, they didn't start the club, but they were really the purveyors of the owners of the club for many years were the Eddens family, and Clarence and Mary Eddens. And Clarence died in the early 90s, and then Mary took over, and she passed away in 2003. So that's really the end, the beginning of the end at that point was her leaving. And of course, just so much change in the city as well. The idea here is that we persuaded the Kresge Foundation to do a planning grant, which we've just completed, which allowed us to have enough money to purchase the building. And so we were able to do that on budget.
And I think it was a $35,000 grant.
Oh, well, the grant was, and then the building was about a third of that. And now we're just we just cleaned it out this last weekend for Motor City Makeover, which is the big District 6 citywide cleanup efforts. And Sound Conservancy now is putting together sort of our decks to go out there and get the monies that we're going to need to take care of the building and take care of ourselves.
So give us some of the Bluebird bona fides, like a lot of big names played there, right?
Yeah, I would say if you were happening in the mid 50s and you hit Detroit, it was a place you came to. mean, the big names are Miles, Davis definitely played here a lot. He was friends with Clarence Eddins, the owner. Sonny Stitt, who, actually lived in the neighborhood at different times. John Coltrane came through.
Mm-hmm.
He met Alice at a after party, after a Bluebird after party is the story.
Wow,
this
that's amazing.
myth and all that. So yeah, so many different musicians. It had its own different bands over time. House bands.
Mm-hmm. Nurtured a lot of in-town talent too.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. And then young people could actually learn on the bandstand. Right in Detroit. Of course, you can go to school for things. That's not a problem. But you really learn how to be a musician by doing it in front of an audience, potentially with older musicians. You're mentored, and the Bluebird was a spot for that as well.
On the Detroit Sound Conservancy website, you describe this building as, quote, a launch pad for sonic and social rebellion during the civil rights movement in Detroit. What do you mean by that?
That's after a lot of thinking about it. It's if you know that neighborhood a little bit, I think right now it's gone through some real struggles. That near West Side, we're only 2 miles west of Motown,
which now the museum.
Yeah, the museum,
Right.
and our biggest neighbor in that neighborhood is the Detroit Land Bank. I mean, they own so many parcels of land. It's really just been hit so hard.
And it looks like today it's right next to like a auto mechanic garage.
Yeah, a couple spots that are open, and we have in Sampson Weber, the middle school is still there. Northwestern High School is still open. I mean, it's not. Their neighborhoods are much harder hit.
Yep.
But in terms of what the neighborhood could be, or sort of what what's next steps and all that kind of stuff. We're a preservation organization. We started about 7 years ago, and our commitment really was to musical legacies writ large, all genres. But over time, we realized we really did need things. We needed a place for our stuff. We got heavy eventually. People gave us ideas for where we could be, and it was always just too big. Everything was like, here, what about some ballroom, a couple of them, and or these big warehouses. And it's just like, under what circumstances?
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine the budget for something of that scale? The Bluebird's I think it's sort of the Goldilocks.
Mm-hmm.
It's under 3,000 square feet. It has a place for the live music venue, right? So you can keep music alive in a very immediate kind of way, and then some space to sort of build up a little bit, maybe a second floor, but at least maybe sort of a loft space above your eye line where we can have our acid-free boxes and manuscripts and have a little office, So I think there's a way to bang buck this and really make the concept really tight. The Detroit Sound Center in the Bluebird Inn.
Yeah, and want to come back to some of your plans for the building, but I want to go back to the question with the civil rights movement and the social rebellion and everything. Explain that.
Yeah, no, I
does that come
apologize.
from?
Yeah, I get all lofty here too quick. No,
okay.
that neighborhood, Tireman was a Mason-Dixon line, and we know this from reading about it. We also know this from the neighborhood that African Americans just weren't allowed to live north of Tireman, right? There were these racist housing covenants. This is the stuff that Thomas Sugru talks about in his Origins of the Urban Crisis book,
right.
That
famous book about Detroit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's still pretty good. And yeah, the racist housing covenants, Black people were moving to that neighborhood north of Tireman in 1948. There's the Orsel and Minnie McGee house. There's an historic marker right there on Sebald. It's just like, 2.5 blocks away from the club. And right at the time where there's Black people are contesting those legal restrictions on where they can live. That's the exact same moment Charlie Parker's playing the Bluebird. And really behind the Bluebird, so south of it is Milford. That's a street, one big block south of Tireman. And that was really the Black business district for that neighborhood. It was a middle class neighborhood for African Americans who own their own shops, doctors, dentists, like all the people who would have had maybe businesses during the day in the Paradise Valley. And
a mini Black Bottom Paradise Valley. Yeah.
But this is where they lived. This is where their single family homes were, right? There were Black social clubs. There were, the numbers, Black numbers were doing really well. And so there was money to an extent, right? You could get capital to start your small business, right? And so Tireman was actually the edge of that, and the Bluebird was right there on that wall. And so, yeah, I don't think we're overstepping it by saying that the people who came to that club knew very well what was at stake.
I imagine that was led to a pretty tense situation there. I mean, you go down to a gig there, and that's got to be a fraught neighborhood for the reasons you just described.
I think it's really interesting. I think we've talked. There are still some people who definitely remember that earlier moment of the club. We've Mr. Willie Bowler, who's a local historian, friends with Miles Davis. We're talking to those kind of people. My old landlord Devon Cunningham used to hang out there in the 40s, and so there's still enough crew where you can sort of ask those questions, actually get answers. But I think it was fraught. But I think it was also, exciting. I think it was also a place of freedom. I think the people felt that way. It was definitely a place of relaxation. A respite from a lot of BS, during the day and during people's lives
and tension.
Yeah, so I think you've got to have that. I think there's no, burnout is real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. You bought this from the Land Bank Authority, is that right?
It's a good question. Technically, it's the Detroit Building Authority on behalf of the Planning Department. It goes through a number of hands. We could do a whole podcast episode on this if you want to. But
I think we'll pass on that for now.
I would.
I appreciate the offer.
I would.
Yeah,
but we're partners. We applied to be a partner, a community partner of the Detroit Land Bank, and that allowed for us to make an offer on the building.
Okay.
Before it would go on auction.
Okay. Because this building was on the dangerous buildings list, but as far as I've read, it's not on any list of being demolished.
You're asking all the right questions.
Yeah.
If you let's believe the city today. If you believe the city today, then yes, it has been on this dangerous buildings list. We just took ownership of the building, weeks. I mean, we're not even, I think we're maybe a month in.
Right. And so the Sound Conservancy owns it free and clear now?
We own it free and clear, and we are actively engaged with everyone who can return an email on its status. Everyone's been alerted to it. We've been told
to make sure
informally and formally that everything will be, to be just A-OK. But we are in the process of buttoning up the building and treating the situation like we need to be extra vigilant.
Yeah.
I mean, the truth of the matter is that without being too, mean-spirited or rough about it, Detroit Sound Conservancy emerged because of a lack of leadership. I mean, it's not on anybody's fault. I mean, the city went through a bankruptcy, right? There wasn't a city, right, for a minute or two, right?
Yeah,
so there's real reasons why people had to step up. And so Sound Conservancy saw itself as stepping up and filling some voids, right? We're hoping, though, now that we have it, it's many years later, hopefully we'll get some of that. Hopefully one of the biggest partners of this project over time will be the city, but we'll have to just see.
Right. So what's next for the building? Like, what are the plans going forward and your timeline for redeveloping it?
We make very good friends with BSEED, the Building Safety and Engineering at, I can't, all the acronyms.
The Building Safety Commission, Department, whatever. Yeah.
And so we make good friends with all those people, and we do exactly as they say. We have really good friends with Raquel Castaneda Lopez, our local council member. She's been really wonderful. She came out to the Motor City The Makeover on Saturday. And the rest of this year is really about building relationships and raising funds.
Okay.
The building, nothing's going to happen to the building right now. There are pictures on our website. It's cleaned out. Right now, the real question is, how sturdy is everything? What can be done to the property? What are those real costs going to look like? Putting those budgets together.
You need to hire like architects to basically do a structural integrity survey and everything?
We're doing all that kind of stuff informally right now. We've identified a potential architect. That was part of the whole planning process with the Kresge Foundation, is we were allowed to, had enough money to take some time and go out and meet people. So, we're doing all that stuff right now, putting together budgets. There's, grants coming up in June. So I think this year is really about neighborhood relationships, though, really building. I mean, we've been going to block club meetings for about a year and a half. People kind of know us now, at least in the immediate blocks, and we've been doing a lot of outreach. So this year is really about cementing that, because without the neighborhood, forget the money. It won't be successful. They've got to join us to make this work.
What do the neighbors over there think of, you guys buying the old Bluebird Inn? What kind of reception have you gotten?
At the end, everything's been really positive. No one's come up to us and go, "Wow, that's a bad idea."
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody thinks it's a great idea. Mm-hmm. People have stories to tell and stories to share. Everybody, just like everybody, Detroiters have 1,000 opinions about what's next. Mm-hmm. Part of it's educating the neighborhood about what our capacities are. We're a bunch of nerds. Like we can't do everything, right? But what we can do is do the things we can do well. Mm-hmm. But it's been really positive. It's just I think it's a real question of what is the city and what do arts funders? What is their appetite and capacity to really see what neighborhood impact can look like with the arts? Mm-hmm. And Kresge Foundation's there already. They're doing that kind of work. So the question is their appetite one more grant bigger? It's right. And if not them, what are the other groups? Because we're really in a neighborhood that hasn't had this specific kind of endeavor in a while.
Yeah,
and I think we can show how important it is.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Detroit Sound Conservancy has, as one of your actual physical assets, you have the stage. Of the Bluebird Inn. Where is that now, and what have you been doing with the actual stage? And talk a little bit about the stage too, because it's sort of a unique piece of architecture.
It's very unique, and our history with the building does not go back to the golden era, but it does go back to the beginning of the organization. I looked in the door 8 years ago. And so started asking, part of the sort of genesis around the organization was asking questions like, okay, I read the book, I like the stuff. How do I help?
Yeah.
Right. How do we help? And asking those questions. So in terms of the stage, halfway in between, about 3 or 4 years ago, it was just so clear that it was the only thing left in the building of any consequence. We had taken our archaeological team in there. We'd pulled out a number of small artifacts and then also pulled out some paperwork from going back to the 1940s. Incredible stuff. But there wasn't anything in there except this gorgeous sort of burlesque style stage. And I say burlesque because it's shiny and just kind of incredible. The roof was caving in. It's like, come on. So that prompted the stage, and then we were able to rebuild it with some grant money that came out of that whole UNESCO. Detroit was named a city of design.
Right.
So we got a little bit of money to do that. This summer, it's been to France, it's been to Toronto. Been to Detroit.
It's like a wooden platform stage.
Yeah, and it's we made it so it divides into 4s and goes through just a regular door. And this summer it'll be at the Stamps Gallery, the undergraduate art gallery at the University of Michigan. It'll be there all summer, starting June 14th through August the 25th.
Okay.
And then this fall, we're hoping it will go regionally. So we're hoping we're going to keep it in the Midwest. Looking at Pittsburgh, actually. Mm-hmm. And then we're looking for, it's going to be, I don't know, at least another strong year before we're able to bring it back to the building itself. So it's a perfect opportunity for it to go out and engage more audiences and build more awareness. It's really the flag. It's really, it's been one of the most, interesting programs I've ever been a part of.
Yeah.
It can go, It's great as an art object to stare at, and then if you put art, musicians on it, it's incredible.
So, are you guys putting a projected opening date, reopening as it were, for the Bluebird? That's just too far away.
No, we've made some informal promises within grant applications.
Sure.
So, if
do you have a goal?
Yeah. Well, I think the goal for us, 2022, would be our 10-year anniversary. Gosh, it'd be nice to be
for the Sound Conservancy.
For the Sound Conservancy, so that feels good.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we want to move as quickly as we can. We're in this sort of. I think there's probably phases. Is the short version, right? Mm-hmm. So, can we do some work in there? Could we have some events next year in the space, even though it's not completely done? And I think the answer is yeah. But what will they look like? How raw will they be?
Yeah, interesting.
I think that's the question right now.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Sound Conservancy is involved in a few other projects around town. You've got something with the old Greystone Ballroom on Woodward, right?
Sure.
And the Detroit Sound System, is that what it's called? Or United Sound System, excuse me.
Well, these are, this is, it's sort of an ensemble of projects. We're trying to synthesize. it's not that we can't have any new ideas. But we've had a lot of ideas, and so I think right now this year is also about consolidation in terms of the projects that we do work on. So we're more focused. Now we're in this neighborhood. We really want to focus in. But United Sound Systems still consider. We are very concerned about United Sound Systems,
which is
on Second. It's the old recording studio. Recently
lots of
owned,
famous people recorded in
just unbelievable. Some of them probably when they came in to play the Bluebird, and United, recently bought by the Michigan Department of Transportation. They promise that they want to save the building. They don't want to tear it down for the highway expansion for 94.
Yeah.
But there's still a lot of questions there. So
they've talked about moving it, I think, too,
yep.
right?
And so we still need to be vigilant and show up for that one. And then the Greystone Ballroom is gone, but the museum collections we have, and we've actually just completed after many years, sort of a full inventory of the manuscript collections, and so we'll be open for researchers on that, this year.
Wow.
And that's a labor of love. That was a lot of saving materials that came out of the book tower, before Mr. Gilbert got to it, and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, in there. But the Greystone Jazz Museum, started in 1974. They're kind of like our aunts and uncles, the generation before us. Detroiters have been trying to preserve their own histories since jump. We're not like we didn't invent this stuff, right? But we're just the newest kid on a long block, and the Greystone is our way to tap into a longer a sense of continuity about music preservation, right? That's why the whole idea with the Bluebird is place keeping versus place making. We're playing around with words a little bit, but the idea is that we're not creating things new, right? We're not reinventing wheels here. Detroiters care about their stories. They care about their objects. It's just at different times the capacity to do that work hasn't been there all the time.
So spinning the calendar forward to 2022 or whenever whenever the magic dust settles on the renovated Bluebird Inn, would the Sound Conservancy operate and run that?
Yes.
I mean, I know you want to use it as like your headquarters and maybe your museum, but would you actually run the business, the entertainment side business too?
You're bringing up a good question. I mean, I think we have to. The answer is we want to do both. Mission wise, we want to have we want them to feed into one another. We want the archives and the oral history work that we do to feed into the live music stuff. Absolutely. But you're also bringing up a really important thing, which is like people get paid to run businesses like this, and it might do really well to just partner with certain crews, right? To just make
booking
things
to do and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think you're bringing up a really good question. I think we're gonna start answering those questions this year. We actually had our sponsorship this last week for Motor City Makeover was the Crowfoot. Our friend Dan McGowan, who works at the Crowfoot, helped us out with some money to help us through the makeover. So we know that there are parts of the music community here that wants us to be successful, who understands more live venues is not a threat to them. It's actually the city becoming more energized. It means more people going out to shows, right?
Yeah.
It means more people involved. So, I think it's a good question. What will the partners be that will really make? Yeah, you don't want me pouring drinks behind the bar, so
okay,
we'll find the partners that make it work.
Right. In the meantime, for our listeners, do you guys have ways that people can help you guys out, or do you have any active crowdfunding campaigns, et cetera?
These are good questions. In terms of volunteers, people should just go to DetroitSound.org. People should sign up for our newsletter. People should contact us and let us know that they want to be a volunteer. We just had 20 volunteers in for this weekend for the Motor City cleanup. I can imagine other opportunities definitely later this year and especially next year around the building. Absolutely. So people should absolutely stay in touch. We have a Patreon, which brings in, a little monthly hit every and that needs to obviously go up because our costs are going up, our overhead's going up. So we really encourage people to go to patreon.com/Detroit Sound. It's a good place to just keep in touch with the active process of the building anyway. And then you can, put your little monthly stipend in, whatever you want to do. And that's really helpful. We're on all the social media and all that stuff. It's our hope that at some point we'll do some office hours this year closer to the neighborhood. We currently have an office in Tech Town. Okay. So that's where we can sort of meet people and do advisor meetings and such. But in terms of active crowd campaigns, we're going to wait right now we've got a couple grants that we're sort of waiting on that if they come in would be very helpful in sort of seeding the work. And then we'll have a better sense of what that number is.
Gotcha.
And then once we know the number, then absolutely, I can definitely see a capital campaign in our futures. Whether it's going to be this year or next year, stay tuned. But I think, we're going to have to, I think the idea is exciting enough. I think people can see it. It's the right scale.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's got great history. So I'm not worried. Maybe I should be worried about the money, but I'm not. I know once we get the idea right, it'll happen. So it's really about putting the partners together this year so that when we finally make, okay, this is it. This is what we're doing. It rings the bell.
We certainly look forward to watching it all come together here at Daily Detroit and, adding another great historic music venue to the cultural fabric of the city.
Yeah, bringing it back online.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Carleton Gholz is director and founder of Detroit Sound Conservancy. Thanks so much for coming in, Carleton.
Thanks so much.
Before we let you go, here are 2 things to know. The Detroit City Council today paved the way for the first new auto plant in the city in nearly 30 years. The complicated deal involves a land swap and tax incentives. It'll help build Fiat Chrysler's new $2.5 billion project on Detroit's east side. The state will grant $55 million to purchase land. Meanwhile, the city is selling the Millennium parking garage in downtown Detroit to raise money to buy land for FCA. The new FCA facility will be built in the place of the old Mack Avenue plant. The Jefferson North Assembly will be modernized. In the deal is a promise that Detroit residents will get the first opportunity for new jobs. FCA says there will be nearly 5,000 jobs at the new facility. Secondly, a nest of red-tailed hawks has moved into the 12th floor of Michigan Central Station, currently being rehabbed by Ford Motor Company. It's expected that the pair of juvenile hawks will take flight soon and move somewhere else. Nearby North Corktown has a variety of urban farms and open spaces left over from building demolition, perfect for an apex predator of small rodents.
Alrighty, friends, that's going to do it for today's show. Hope you enjoyed our little time machine visit into Detroit's jazz heyday past and are as excited about the Bluebirds' future as we are here at Daily Detroit. For Jairus Days, I'm Sven Gustafson. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, take care of each other, and we'll see you around Detroit.
You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.